Hey everybody, I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Welcome to the briefing room. You just saw Mark Warner there on the Senate floor talking about President Trump's interview with our George Stephanopoulos yesterday from the Oval Office. We'll get into some more highlights from that interview coming up. Also, our interview with Ash Carter, the former Defense Secretary, on the state of affairs at the Pentagon, the biggest threats facing the United States today. And we start with some breaking news out of the Pentagon and State Department today, as the Trump administration has just announced that they believe Iran is responsible for those two tanker attacks in the Gulf of Oman overnight, 1 month after 4 other ships were attacked in the same area. Take a look at these dramatic pictures coming in, simply stunning images that defy the imagination. This area was struck multiple times now by what the Trump administration believes were Iran-aligned forces of some kind. The U.S. Navy rescuing a dozen mariners from that ship right there. Here was Secretary Pompeo a short time ago.
It is the assessment of the United States government that the Islamic Republic of Iran is responsible for the attacks that occurred in the Gulf of Oman today. This assessment is based on intelligence, the weapons used, the level of expertise needed to execute the operation, recent similar Iranian attacks on shipping, and the fact that no proxy group operating in the area has the resources and proficiency to act with such a high degree of sophistication. Iran should meet diplomacy with diplomacy, not with terror, bloodshed, and extortion. The United States will defend its forces, interests, and stand with our partners and allies to safeguard global commerce and regional stability. And we call upon all nations threatened by Iran's provocative acts to join us in that endeavor.
This happened on a key shipping route for millions of barrels of oil going to and from the Persian Gulf. A third of the world's oil passes through the Gulf of Oman. It's a critical region there in the Middle East. You see it on the map. Former Defense Secretary Ash Carter visited the briefing room a short time ago. We asked him about the stakes in all of this for Americans. Here's what he had to say.
It's serious in two senses. I mean, first of all, even though we are not, as the United States, as dependent as we used to be directly upon Gulf oil, the world economy is, and so it comes back to us in price spikes. In that sense, it's important. But the real strategic importance is you can't have Iran attacking shipping and kind of trying to dominate its region from what is overall a very weak geostrategic position for them. So they're playing a dangerous game if they are
behind it. Let's go to the Pentagon now for more on what this means. Our senior Pentagon reporter, Louis Martinez, has been all over the story. Louis, the Secretary of State issued somewhat of a veiled threat a little earlier today, said that if American interests are at risk here, that the U.S. will respond. The suggestion was militarily. Do we know yet if a red line has been crossed with the administration in this series of attacks? What do you know about how we might respond?
Well, Devin, I can tell you that definitely this item is being discussed at the highest levels of the U.S. government. You don't send the Secretary of State out there to make an allegation like the one that he did without having concrete evidence and without having discussed it at the highest levels. It is extraordinary to me to see Secretary Pompeo out more than 12 hours after the first reports of this incident having taken place. Let's recall that about a month ago with those 4 freighters that were attacked, the U.S. publicly blaming Iran, but that took weeks for that public blaming to take place, and it took about a week for the assessment to be made that it was probably Iran that was behind the attack. And here you have a whirlwind within 12 hours. America's senior diplomat publicly blaming Iran. There is discussion about how to react to this aggression. It's a matter of, as you said, is it a red line that the Trump administration has set for Iran? We know that they've been very public in their language about how strong they feel that Iran is posing a threat to the American forces in the region as well as its interests. And like you said, Secretary Pompeo, they're saying that the U.S. will come to the defense of itself or of any partner nations in the area if they come under attack.
And it's certainly a hot situation. Louis Martinez keeping an eye on things from the Pentagon. Thanks a lot, Louis, on the breaking news. Now to ABC News exclusive, an extraordinary interview with President Trump over 2 days. Our George Stephanopoulos spent time flying with the president on Air Force One in the Beast as he traveled on the road, and then, of course, getting that exclusive sit-down in the Oval Office and in the Rose Garden. Justin Fischel is here on the rim with us in the briefing room. He heads our White House unit and helped George Stephanopoulos with the interview. Our White House reporter, Jordan Phelps, is here as well. Justin, this interview was significant for a number of reasons.
It was a fantastic interview. There's more to come. A couple big picture things that stood out to me. First thing you have to know, the president has not sat down with us for a year to the date. That in itself is remarkable, that he is actually taking time to speak to ABC. He usually does these friendly interviews where he doesn't get challenged the way that others would. Now, to his credit, he's a guy who used to not be able to get off the phone, okay? But he sort of ended that, and so this was great to get George a chance to sit to, like he got about 2 hours with him, all said. So there's
a lot of headlines in here.
A lot of headlines. There's that he actually did the interview, and second, that George is someone who can fact check in real time, and he was able to do that. It's someone who could actually challenge him and push him, and we saw that, and that's what led to these headlines. The big headline, we'd like to play that sound for you right now, obviously about Trump saying he would be open to listening to foreign intelligence in the next campaign. Let's play that.
Okay, let's put yourself in a position. You're a congressman. Somebody comes up and says, hey, I have information on your opponent. Do you call the FBI? I don't think.
Coming from
I'll tell you
Russia,
what,
you do.
I've seen a lot of things over my life. I don't think in my whole life I've ever called the FBI. In my whole life. You don't call the FBI. Life doesn't work that way.
The FBI director says that's what should happen.
The FBI director is wrong because, frankly, it doesn't happen like that in life.
Your campaign this time around, if foreigners, if Russia, if China, if someone else offers you information on an opponent, should they accept it or should they call the FBI?
I think maybe you do both. I think you might want to listen. There's nothing wrong with listening. If somebody called from a country, Norway, we have information on your opponent. Oh, I think I'd want to hear it.
You want that kind of interference in our elections?
It's not an interference. They have information. I think I'd take it.
So why is this such a big deal, Justin? The president was tweeting sort of a defense after the fact, said, listen, he talks to foreign governments all the time. What's he supposed to do if they volunteer information?
Well,
turn them away?
As George pointed out, you're supposed to tell the FBI and not listen. And that's the headline. Trump, after all this whole investigation we went through, the first 2 years of his presidency, he's saying, well, I'd listen.
And it begs the question if the president would be comfortable with Democrats, not that they would do this, but calling on China to get a hold of his taxes. Hillary Clinton has raised this hypothetical. What if the Democratic nominee were to solicit help from a foreign government? Would he be fine with that? I mean, this opens up a whole other...
Hard to imagine he wouldn't criticize for that one. But hey, we'll have to ask him.
And Jordan, it's getting a lot of blowback on Capitol Hill. Republicans, though, have been pretty quiet on this.
Absolutely. We have heard a couple of Republicans express some discomfort with it. We now see Democrats leading this new push to pass legislation that would require campaigns to report to the FBI if they get offers of foreign help, but also creating quite the stir out on the campaign trail among those Democratic candidates, as you might expect. Kamala Harris, former Vice President Joe Biden, saying that this shows that President Trump is a national security threat, that he's again, inviting foreign interference, and then a number of others going so far as to say this hastens those calls for
Nancy
impeachment.
Pelosi said it's appalling behavior by the president, even if it's not illegal in some fashion.
And most importantly, the president's ally, Lindsey Graham, we caught up with him today, and he said this is not the right thing to do. Lindsey Graham is saying it. Chris Wray, his FBI director, is saying it, and even his Attorney General, Bill Barr, is saying it. These are, and Trump is saying plainly there to George that the FBI director is wrong, they are wrong, I should be able to listen. And then that raises questions for Democrats. Is he saying, I would openly commit a crime? Because that's, there are laws about this stuff. But he's walking this fine line because he's just raising the specter, which really agitates the Democrats, and they're sort of struggling to figure out how to respond to all this.
It also shows just how unapologetic he is for the last go-round, right? This was sort of what the Mueller investigation was all about. The president is saying here he has no apologies, and he'd do it again.
It's a bit of a finger in the eye there after all of the Mueller drama. George also asked the president during his ride in the Beast about this flurry of recent polling that came out, national polling, state polling, that show the president in some pretty tough matchups against Democrats. It's very early. We should say this is one poll, but the numbers don't look so great. Let's see how the president responded to that question.
Well, I don't believe those polls. There's no way he beats me in Texas.
But even your own polls show you're behind right now, don't they?
No, my polls show that I'm winning everywhere.
I don't know. We've all seen these reports that with 15 out of 17 states, you spent $2 million on a poll and you're behind in 15 out of 17 states.
Nobody showed you those polls because those polls don't exist, George. Those polls don't exist. You mean I'm losing in 15 out of 17 states? Those polls don't exist. I just was given a meeting with my pollster, who I frankly don't even believe in pollsters, if you want to know the truth. You just run a campaign, and whatever it is, it is. But I just had a meeting with somebody that's a pollster, and I'm winning everywhere.
And he's polling obsessed.
Yeah, he is. First of all, can I just say, we got access into the limousine, the Beast. Thing is huge. But then when you open the doors are like this thick. And once they get in there, they're all, you saw them all cramped together, which is kind of interesting.
And notice how George wears his seatbelt.
Yes, he did. He made mention of that.
No risks.
Very responsible. Yes, look, the internal reports, the reports were, and we've reported that his internal polls, the polls that the president conducted himself, were not good. They show him losing in several key states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. He's against these polls now, but I would point out, so is Biden. Biden's not big into the polls right now. It is very early. I think we all need to be very careful about how we look at these polls in general. So he's got some allies there. I just hope this doesn't go down the road of the rigged election a year from now.
Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. Finally, Jordan, do have to ask you about some news out of the White House that hit just before we came on the air today. The Office of Special Counsel, which is different from Robert Mueller. It's an independent watchdog agency that enforces government ethics rules, actually issued a letter to the White House today saying that Kellyanne Conway, the president's advisor, should be removed from office because of repeated violations of the Hatch Act. Tell us about that.
Yeah, really remarkable. This is the first time this office has actually recommended a White House official be removed from their seat, but they're going so far as to say that with Kellyanne Conway, they describe her as a repeat offender of the Hatch Act, which
What's
is
the violation?
Well, basically, Kellyanne Conway has been kind of loose-lipped in making statements related to campaign issues, and as a formal government official, she's supposed to steer clear of wading into these kind of campaign issues, influencing campaigns. And they say she's overstepped that. Now, to be expected, the White House is coming out with a full-throated defense of Kellyanne Conway. They are saying that this is a deeply flawed argument, and they're arguing that this violates Kellyanne Conway's free speech rights. But Devin, as you well know, covering the Supreme Court, they've spoken out on this. If you are a government official, your First Amendment rights are more limited in that role.
It doesn't look like she's going anywhere.
Right,
anytime soon.
To skip ahead, it's the White House's own discretion here,
Absolutely.
right?
President has the final call here.
There are no teeth. It's an advisory agency, but an interesting, unprecedented letter nonetheless. Guys, thank you so much. Justin Fischel, head of our White House unit, Jordan Phelps at the White House for us. Next now to more of our conversation with former Defense Secretary Ash Carter, who came in today. He has a new book out called Inside the Five-Sided Box, Lessons from a Lifetime of Leadership Inside the Pentagon. It's a fascinating read. I asked him about the biggest threats facing our country, the necessity of a space force, the controversy over transgender troops in the military, and what it's like to lead one of the biggest agencies in all of government. You speak about national security threats in the book. You've actually, like a good military guy, have an acronym for it, CRIKT, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, terrorism, the five biggest ones. Which one worried you the most when you were Defense
the reason
Secretary?
to talk about CRIKT, which the military in its usual way turned into an acronym and a pronounceable one, cricket, was just my very simple way of saying, here are today's problems. We need to be ready. And in answer to your question, which is the worst, we got to do all five of them. And if you think about it, each of those five is focused only on us. They only have one problem to worry about. We have five problems to worry about. That doesn't talk about the future. And if you're the Secretary of Defense, you're the Secretary of Defense of today, but you always got to remember of tomorrow as well.
So Space Force is a good idea?
Well, that's an example. I would have taken a different managerial approach.
I want to ask you
By the way, parenthetically, President Obama was attracted to Space Force, too. And he kept coming back to me about this, and I kept saying...
Did he ask about creating a separate branch and what that would look like?
He convened several meetings.
Oh, interesting.
In which he said, Ash, shouldn't we have a Space Force? And I always said, no, I think and I argued for another managerial approach, and he would accept that.
But I do want to ask about North Korea. The current president, President Trump, has been repeatedly claiming that the administration was awfully close to war with North Korea. In fact, just yesterday, he said it looked like it was going to be war with North Korea when I took over as president. Everybody knows that. Is that true?
I wouldn't say it was close to war. I would say that North Korea was plummeting pell-mell forward with its nuclear program, something needed to be done about that. We did not conduct negotiations with North Korea. My approach was deterrence and defense, building missile defenses, strengthening our forces, strengthening South Korean forces, so that North Korea would always know that if it started anything, its military would be destroyed and its regime would be destroyed, and their certainty of that.
Did that approach
fail? That was important to me. Well, we didn't have a war. In that sense, it succeeded,
Sure.
but it did not turn back their nuclear program.
In his interview with George Stephanopoulos yesterday, the president was asked if a foreign country approached him with some information about his Democratic opponent, what would he do? He said he'd hear them out. Do you see any danger in that?
Yeah, I think President of the United States in any matter oughtn't to be relying upon information provided by a federal or a foreign
He says he
power.
talks to foreign governments every day.
Well, of course you talk to foreign powers every day, and they tell you things, and sometimes you believe them, and sometimes you don't. But when it comes to domestic politics, my answer would be, look, we'll talk about foreign policy, but I'm not going to talk about American politics with you. You're a foreign leader.
You were also the secretary who lifted the military's ban on transgender service members, which was you were hailed for a significant decision that, this president's reversed it. Just last week he said of transgender service members, they take massive amounts of drugs. You're not allowed to take drugs. Wanted to ask you about that. Surely you heard those counter arguments at the time. How did you overcome that in your mind?
Two things.
How did you counter that?
No, there's something in there. We have an all-volunteer force, and we need to get good people. And what matters is military qualifications. Everything else is social policy. Military policy is to get the best qualified people. That's the basis of everything I did in personnel. Now, with respect to transgender, I said that if transgender members were to be accessed to the U.S. military, they had to be stable in their new gender, as is what I announced at the time, for 18 months before we would take them, because we weren't going to take the readiness and cost implications of this, which is the medical point I think that was being referred to.
Your book is quite a sweeping and detailed look at what it takes to run a mammoth organization. In fact, very early in the book, you talk about the number of people that you had reporting to you as secretary. The Defense Department employs more people than Amazon, McDonald's, FedEx, Target, and GE combined. Half the federal budget was under your control. What was the secret to being a successful leader of that?
The Defense Department thrives on clarity and consistency. So you need to be very clear. And I always chose my words very carefully. I'd write my own statements if we were doing something new so that everything was just right. The other thing is to make people and their families feel good about what they're doing. So when I went out and talked to troops, I would always do two things. One was to tell them their mission and how important it was strategically. But the other one was to say, you are doing the most noble thing that a young person can do with your life.
Our thanks again to Ash Carter for that conversation. Finally, today, here on TBR, we like to shine a spotlight on issues of huge consequence that often receive little attention. Today, we're taking a closer look at what advocates call a global crisis of landmines. Millions of them are still on the ground. Hundreds of thousands of people are maimed or injured each year all around the globe, many of them in Africa. This had been on the decline, but until now, they are on the rise again, particularly in Yemen, where the concentrations of landmines have now reached World War II concentrations. One American victim of landmines, Ken Rutherford, has dedicated his life to raising awareness about them. He partnered with Princess Diana before her death, and he's still at it today.
Because landmines continue to maim and kill long after the wars that they're laid for. There's a deadly legacy to these weapons. They're internally vigilant, and they're victim activated. So we lay thousands during the war, and the peace treaties are signed, and the soldiers go home, and the landmines are still lying out there, and the civilians come back and are harmed.
Your work right now actually focuses on one country in particular, Yemen. A lot of Americans may not be familiar with it, but groups like yours are saying that there's the highest concentration of landmines in Yemen than at any point since World War II?
Yeah, so there's a lot of landmines being used in Yemen right now. Scissor JMU, we've been around for about over 20 years, and we've never seen this much landmine infestation in such a short period of time. Groups are using anti-personnel mines. They're converting anti-tank mines to anti-personnel mines, and they're deploying booby traps around water sources and retreat routes.
How do you get more awareness about landmines, and what do you actually want the U.S. Congress to do?
About 26 years ago, I was working a couple hundred miles away from Yemen, and I was introduced to a landmine in Somalia where I ended up losing both my legs to a landmine. And I had a great medical care, being an American, awesome vocational training, got my PhD, all through our country, my wife, the medical establishment, God. That was a wing beneath my wings. And I'd like to see the same for those victims in Yemen.
You work closely with Princess Diana back at that time. In fact, there's some images, of course, from her advocacy in that country and around the world to cut back and eliminate the use of landmines. Do you look back on her work on landmines and see a legacy there that's still lasting?
That was an amazing experience working with the princess in Bosnia. Unfortunately, she passed a couple weeks after that visit. But what she did is she highlighted the plight of landmine victims. So really the landmine victims back then brought a baton to the world in terms of international language, assisted by Her Majesty Princess Diana.
Well, our thanks again to Ken Rutherford. As he makes calls on Congress today, he'll be joined by one of the ambassadors of the country's most valuable resources in the fight against landmines, mine-detecting dogs. The Marshall Legacy Institute brought one of those dogs here to the briefing room yesterday in partnership with dozens of American school kids and support from the Department of State. The Institute has trained and deployed hundreds of these dogs overseas. 10-year-old German Shepherd Yankee came here to show us how she does it. Tell us about Yankee. What does she do?
She's a special dog. You know, she's 10 years old, going on 11, and believe it or not, she spent 7 years in Sri Lanka.
She did. She's a veteran.
Yeah, we sent her there a long time ago. Why? To sniff out landmines to save and improve lives of the Sri Lankan people.
She is definitely a sniffer.
She did a
beautiful
fantastic job. She helped search millions of square meters of land so that it's safe for the people. The landmine sniffing dog typically operates not on a short leash like I have now, but on a long 10-meter leash. And the dog and his handler go to an area suspected of mine contamination. The handler doesn't go into the suspected area, but the dog does. But they work very closely together, and the handler is always tethered to the dog on the 10-meter leash.
You said you have dozens of them around the world.
250 given around the world.
Gifts of the American people
Yes.
to countries where landmines are a big problem.
Yes.
What are they looking for? How do they find? How big is a landmine?
Would you like to see one of those? I just happen to have one here in my pocket today.
Look at this guy.
Well,
is that live?
This is not live. I would not be here on the streets of Washington, D.C. with the live one, but it's the real shebang. We've taken the explosive odor out of it.
So these are plastic devices.
It's plastic.
This is the pressure trigger.
Yes, it's plastic. This is the plunger, and they're looking for the explosives that's in one of these insidious killers. They're typically buried.
So can you show us how Yankee works? Yankee, can you show us how you sniff for mines?
Oh, I'd love to.
All right, let's go.
All right, soup. Ivan. Is it? See if there's anything there.
So there's nothing
no mine.
there.
Okay. And then the next one.
Nothing there.
And then the next one.
Nothing there.
And then the last. And then here it is. And again, we said we're not going to put an actual mine here, but this one is inert, but it gives you the idea. And what do we have here? We got some black powder from a shotgun shell. And there's enough common characteristics in this particular scent similar to those that are found in these actual landmines.
And that's what she's trained to
And that's
sniff.
what she cares for. She cares if the explosive scent is there. That's what she's alerting to. That's why she's so valuable. That's why she can find mines that the best metal detectors in the world have a hard time finding.
All right, our thanks again to Yankee and to Handler President Perry Baltimore of the Marshall Legacy Institute for coming by. We're joined live now by one of the students who have sponsored dogs through the Marshall Legacy Institute's program. Haley Hires from Connecticut joins us. Great to see you, Haley. You actually adopted a dog, helped raise money to fund one of these kids when you were at Greenwich Country Day School. Tell us about how you got involved and what you learned in the process.
Well, my whole family had been involved with CHAMPS and the Marshall Legacy Institute for years. And my family has actually helped raise money for multiple dogs. And I got really involved with it during my time at the Greenwich Country Day School. And when I was in 5th grade, me and my cousins, we raised money through triathlons and bake sales and lemonade stands. And we would make like little bracelets and accessories with the CHAMPS logo on it and sell them. And we raised enough money to train Rachel, the landmine detection dog, and send her off to Bosnia, where she sniffs out.
That's fantastic. We're seeing pictures here of Rachel overseas. Looks like you were there as well. You got your brother and sister involved in the program too?
Yes, both my siblings are involved, and my cousins are too. And the whole organization has really made a big impact on our family, and we love to be involved with it and to work to help the landmine crisis worldwide.
What do you say to your classmates, to Americans, young people your age, who would see the landmine crisis as being so far away? Yemen, to many people, seems like a distant conflict. The United States is not directly involved there. What have you learned in going through this process that convinced you that landmines are really such a horrible thing that need to be addressed?
Well, when I went to Bosnia and I had the experience to see Rachel in action and to see the crisis of landmines, we actually visited one of the schools and we met with the school children, and it was just so terrible to see how affected they were. And these poor children are innocent civilians who have to grow up living in these countries that are affected from the remnants of war. And there are still wars going on around the world. And without the help of people in America and people who can give aid, these children have to grow up their whole lives living with landmines right near their schools and in parks and in a lot of really accessible places.
Yeah,
so
it's a terrific effort that you undertook and that your classmates undertook, and your brother and sister and a lot of students. We understand dozens of schools around the country have been sponsoring dogs. Real quick before we go, where is Rachel now? Is the dog still over in Bosnia?
Yes, she is. I believe that she's still in Bosnia working to sniff out landmines. And I know she's cleared a lot of land, so hopefully she'll clear more, and hopefully people will get involved and can help raise more money for more dogs.
And saved a lot of lives for sure. Haley Hires, a salute to you from us here at the Briefing Room. Thanks so much. And a salute to all the dogs out there as well. Yankee, Rachel, and all the others with the Marshall Legacy Institute. That's all today here in the Briefing Room. We're here every day, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Replayed at 5:30 and 6:30. You can find us on the ABC News app, Roku, Hulu, all the places. You can watch ABC News Live. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Hope to see you here tomorrow.